Have you ever stopped to wonder, just in passing, on an ordinary day, what you would really feel if, without a sign or a word, the person who quietly cooked your meals, washed your clothes, and carefully dusted every last corner of your home simply vanished? Suppose that one morning you found your mom was just gone. No warning, no goodbye, not so much as a note. Would you even notice? And if you did, what would rise up inside you? My story begins on what seemed an ordinary evening. There we all were, gathered round for my 76th birthday dinner. It looked warm, almost cheerful on the outside. But at the height of things, my daughter-in-law Jessica turned to me, her voice steady, and said in front of everyone, "I never really liked you." Not from the beginning. I just smiled. Quiet, as always. I said nothing, only held her gaze and gave a small, gentle laugh. The meal went on. But that night, something changed. I left a letter. No big announcement, no outpouring of feeling. I simply placed it where they'd find it, and the next morning, when the family discovered the note, the whole house went silent. I suppose it's because the person everyone had always treated as just there, background fixture, someone they could take for granted, was now, for the first time, truly not there at all. And this time, nothing was left behind for them. Not a meal, not a word, not an explanation. Not even a hint of how to carry on. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Evelyn Fisher. This year, I turned 76. If you were just passing by my little house out in the New York suburbs, 2 stories, fading paint, rose bushes clinging onto the white picket fence, you'd see nothing remarkable, just an old lady, small and silver-haired, tending her flowers or sitting quietly by the window, living out her days alone. But that's only how things appear from the outside. If anyone ever truly wanted to listen, I have a story to tell. A story about love, about sacrifice, about what binds a family together, and sometimes, about the illusions we fool ourselves with along the way. See, I married young 24. My husband Walter was teaching elementary school back then. He was a gentleman, reserved, soft-spoken, always attentive to the small things. We never had much extra money, but we made a comfortable, ordinary life together. Walter never smoked, he didn't care for alcohol, and he never once raised his voice to me. We were blessed, I told myself. Blessed, until fate turned cruel. The winter I was 42, Walter was walking to work, just as he always did. There was ice on the roads, I remember, and a truck. Its brakes went out. Just like that, in an instant, I lost him. The police called while I was cooking breakfast. One moment, I was standing in the kitchen with bacon hissing in the pan, thinking about grocery lists and my son's lunch money. The next, everything crumbled around me. My son Michael was just 16 that year. There was no time for tears. No room to let myself fall apart. From that morning forward, I was not only a mother but also, out of pure necessity, became Michael's father as well. I closed the wedding photo album and tucked it away deep in my dresser drawer. I hung Michael's backpack by the door, like always. I stood up straight and told myself, "You can't allow yourself to break down. He needs you strong." I found full-time work sewing in a factory, and in the evenings, I took in piecework stitching at our tiny kitchen table. I skipped breakfast most days, used the savings for Michael's milk or shoes. When I got sick, I stayed home instead of going to the doctor. The copay was too much for us. Sure, Michael grew up without his father, but what he never lacked was love. I gave him everything I had, every meal I missed, every hour of sleep, every small dream I set aside. My private hope was simple. If I could just keep going, love him straight and true and never complain, perhaps heaven would eventually reward us. I used to believe, deep down, that this was how the universe worked. And you know what? Part of me thinks that belief wasn't wrong after all. Michael, my boy, grew up strong and smart. He went to a technical college, studied electrical engineering, pushed through those difficult years, and finally landed a supervisor job with a big construction company in Manhattan. The day he got promoted, he called me, his voice shaking. "Mom, I finally made it. We're really gonna be okay." I cried. I wanted to say something, but the words would not come. Inside, every tear was folded. The memory of all those late nights bent over a sewing machine, the meals skipped for his sake, the quiet loneliness of cold winter rooms. It was all there, brimming over in that one moment. Michael got married not long after. His wife, Jessica, was bright, polite, full of energy. Her family was well off. Her father owned a law firm down in the city. When Michael told me they were engaged, my heart leapt with happiness. And yet, deep down, I felt a little pang. Not jealousy exactly. Just the quiet ache of knowing that, from now on, I would no longer be Michael's number one. But this is just how it is for mothers, I reminded myself, and truly believed it. I did everything I could for them. Handed over the whole first floor of my little house for the newlyweds. I moved myself into the attic. Just a small, low-ceilinged space with a single bed, a little dresser, and a window peeking out at the neighbor's rooftop. When the neighbors found out, they were surprised. "Evelyn, why'd you move upstairs? Isn't it stuffy up there? Take the master." "You've earned it." I'd just smile. You know, when you get older, you eat less, sleep less. As long as the kids are laughing and making memories, what more could I want? And I believed that. I truly did. The sounds of laughter drifting up the stairs, the clatter of spoons at the table, talk of new babies in the yard, those were the pictures I painted for myself. Called Grandma by my daughter-in-law. Cooking, side by side, sipping tea with Michael in the late afternoons, a family New Year gathering. I'd tell myself, this is happiness. This is all I could ever wish for. But dreams, especially the dreams families weave for themselves, can start to unravel without warning. I didn't see the cracks at first. All my life, I believed if I loved well enough and tried hard enough, I'd be accepted, welcomed, and cherished. That was my guiding belief. Even as I aged, even as things changed, I quietly carried the weight of self-sacrifice, no longer because I had to, but because it had become my purpose. I thought, in some unspoken way, if I gave enough, nothing could ever break the bonds of family. But that illusion shattered all at once, on my 76th birthday. The words Jessica spoke were cold, unvarnished. "I never liked you." Not even at the start. I smiled, silent. But inside me, something broke. The sound was so quiet, you'd miss it unless you were listening closely. Looking back, I realized that something had felt off from the start. When Jessica first moved into our house, I'd wanted things to be warm and easy. No drama, no raised voices, just kindness. But what echoed between us was emptiness. It wasn't any one event. No shouting matches, no slammed doors. Still, the absence of warmth was everywhere. Eyes that didn't meet mine. Short greetings in the morning that never came from the heart. And above all, the feeling that I, Evelyn, was not really a part of their world. Not a full member of the family anymore. I felt like a shadow passing through my own home. That morning, just like every other, I made tea. I wanted to start their day with something warm, a small gesture of peace. I carried the tray to the kitchen where the door was half open and paused, knocking quietly and smiling as I peeked inside. "Jessica, I made some tea. Would you like a cup?" She didn't turn. She kept slicing carrots, never even glanced my way. My words reached her, of that I'm certain. But all she said was, in a flat voice, "I'm a little busy right now." And so I stood there, teacups trembling just so on the tray, before quietly closing the door and heading back up the narrow attic stairs. That's how it was for years. Silence thickened between us like fog. Not anger, just an emptiness. On my birthday, the one with the dinner, the awkward laughter, the cake I baked myself, Jessica said her piece. Michael, my son, said nothing at all, just looked away. That night, I packed a single bag and wrote a letter. Not much. Just enough to let them know I wasn't coming back. Just enough to make them realize what it meant when the smallest things disappeared from their lives. No more folded laundry, no more dinner waiting after work. No soft voice asking, "How was your day?" The next morning, my absence filled the whole house like a sharp, cold wind. For years, I'd thought that family was something real, something that could never crumble, as long as you gave enough of yourself. What I learned, finally, is that sometimes family is just a lovely illusion. And in the end, it is silence and the empty spaces we leave behind that speak the loudest. If you're listening now, if you've made it this far, I have only one question for you. What would you feel if the one person you'd counted on, the one who had quietly built your home and your life, simply vanished? No goodbye, no words, just a silence that could never be filled? That's what I leave you with. The silence. The blank space. The echo left behind by a mother's love when nobody bothered to notice it was there at all. I set the cup of tea down softly on the kitchen table and slipped quietly out of the room. There was a heaviness settling in my chest, like something was sinking far down inside. But, I told myself, we've only just started living together. Maybe it's just that we're not used to each other yet. Those were the words I pressed firmly into my own heart, steadying myself, holding on to some small hope. Even now, I remember the first time I found the courage to ask her directly, "Jessica, would it be all right if I helped out in the kitchen?" A question so common between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Nothing out of the ordinary, at least, not for most. But Jessica never looked up from the sink, not even for a moment. Her answer came back cold, clipped. "The kitchen's too small for two. It's easier if I'm alone." Then she shut the door, not slamming it, just quietly, but in a way that divided her world from mine completely. I shared this story with my oldest friend, Linda Barnes. Linda and I became close in our 20s. She lost her husband a few months before I did, and together we navigated the years of raising children on our own. She had a son and daughter, me with just Michael. In the leanest times, we sometimes split a single packet of ramen noodles between us, sharing what little we had, leaning on each other for comfort and company. After I told her about Jessica and the kitchen, Linda gave a long sigh, took a sip of her tea, and said gently, "Evelyn, if they don't need you in there, don't force your way in. Sometimes that's just the way it is." I hadn't thought of it like that before. Her words hit me with a quiet sort of force. I tried to play it off, putting on a smile. "Oh, I don't think it's like that," I told her. "We're just not used to each other yet. As long as I keep doing my best, open my heart, I think things will change sooner or later." Linda only sighed again and didn't say another word. There was something in her eyes, sympathy, resignation, maybe something I can't quite forget, even now. After that, I made myself work even harder. I dusted the stairs each morning, folded all the laundry on the back porch, and kept a fresh stack of clean towels set out on the shelf for Michael. I didn't do it because I needed anyone to thank me. I wasn't longing for gratitude or recognition, just a little notice. A nod, maybe. That tiny gesture of acknowledgement. That was all I wished for. Instead, I got nothing at all. That's when I started noticing the small wrongness, those tiny things that add up. For example, when I'd step into the living room, Jessica and Michael would fall silent. Whatever they were talking about, their words would hang there, unsaid, until I left. Then, from down the hallway or at the top of the attic stairs, I'd hear them pick up the conversation again, low and easy, their laughter hidden from me. One day, on a whim, I snuck soundlessly down the hall, careful not to let the floorboards creak. But even then, I only caught fragments, a half-whispered story, Michael's low voice. Nothing I could grasp or make out. Only a sense that there was a whole other life below the surface, a world from which I had vanished. Another morning, I brought home a box of fudge brownies, Michael's favorite, as long as I could remember. I didn't put a name on the box. I just left it out on the kitchen table thinking, whoever wants some, can have some. That's all I want. No expectations, no strings. The next day, I found that same box, unopened, crumpled in the garbage. Not a single brownie missing, just thrown out. I took the box from the trash, brushed it off quietly, and slipped it into the back of my dresser drawer. It was as if I were trying, hopelessly, to hang on to something as it faded away, clinging to the last scraps of a memory already slipping from my fingers. Not too long after that, on my way back from a doctor's appointment, just a routine checkup, I bumped into Jessica on the stairs, a bottle of medicine rattling dully in the bag at my side. The doctor says my blood pressure's running low. Seems I'm not eating enough these days, that's all. I tried to offer it as a hint, hoping for a note of concern or at least some small warmth. But Jessica just looked at me, face unchanged, and replied, "Try to eat more, okay? I don't have time to make extra, you know. Not for you." For a moment, I was utterly speechless. It wasn't the weight of her words. They were almost too light, tossed away as if I were some bothersome tenant instead of Michael's mother. In that instant, it hit me, to her. I was simply an inconvenience. Someone to work around, a presence she could barely tolerate. After that, I started waking up earlier each morning. Maybe it was insomnia, or maybe I just didn't want to be seen. At night, I'd lie in the darkness of the attic, my mind a tangle of threads. The silence pressed in, heavy, constant. I'd wonder, did I do something wrong? Is growing old really so troublesome? Why do I feel so lost, so out of place, right here in my own home? That's when I began keeping a diary. Not as a way to complain, but because I needed a place to set down the thoughts I couldn't voice. The ones that pressed in until the only choice left was to let them out, word by word. On the first page, I wrote, "Up at 5 every morning. Boil water for tea. Step outside and water the little patch of flowers by the porch, quiet, peaceful. Inside, not a sound except the hum of the microwave and the scuff of Jessica's slippers. But my heart? It hasn't felt warm in a long time. I didn't want to hate Jessica. Truly, deep down, I hoped for something better. I used to dream almost every night that she'd call me Mom with a natural kindness. That we'd cook together, peel apples, shape cookies, laugh over Michael's boyhood favorites, gathered all around the table. I clung to those images, but maybe it was all a mirage. Maybe I'd believed in something that never really existed. Only once did I ever bring it up with Michael. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. He was bent over blueprints at his little workstation by the window. I came in, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Michael, I get the feeling Jessica's been keeping her distance lately. Did I do something wrong?" My voice felt small, almost childlike. He didn't look up, didn't even pause. "No, Mom. She's just busy, that's all. Don't overthink it." I forced a smile. "Okay, if you say so." But somewhere deep down, I knew then. I was no longer anyone's priority. That was the last real conversation I ever had with my son. After that, I let myself go silent. In the attic, I kept to myself. I walked quietly, closed doors softly, tried not to laugh too hard, tried not to be seen. I thought I was still a mother, still the same person I'd always been. But no one else seemed to see me at all anymore. And so, what began as a small, nagging ache became something else, something I could no longer call a feeling. By then, it was simply reality. Cold, unyielding, impossible to avoid. The truth standing there in plain sight. Where all of this will lead, I still don't know. But if I've learned one thing, it's this. In a house where no kindness is shown, silence itself becomes a mother's last lingering voice. That winter came earlier than any I could remember. It was only the start of November, but already the mornings were sharp, a breath of frost curling over the shingles of our old roof, coating everything in a thin, silvery layer. I woke up, as always, while it was still black outside, well before 5. The cold from the draft sneaking under the attic door crept straight through to my bones. But I put on my thick old winter robe and did what I always did. I made my way to the backyard. It had become my routine, those early hours alone in the chill. Under the porch window, I kept a row of potted yellow chrysanthemums, planted at the start of fall. I liked to squat quietly, gathering up the fallen leaves with one hand as I cradled a little green watering can. The ground was slicker than usual, not quite dry from the night air. I suppose I should have been more careful. When I leaned in close to the edge of the flower bed, a simple thing, not worth thinking about, my foot slipped on the damp stone. For a second, I felt myself lift clear off the ground, all weightless, before landing hard on the icy concrete. My left arm struck the planter's edge. The watering can flew from my hand, water spilling everywhere in a shining arc. I didn't cry. I bit down and bore the pain, shaking but steady, propping myself up with what strength was left in my right hand. There was a harsh ache tearing through my shoulder. For a breath, I couldn't get air. Just then, the front door swung wide. Michael, my son, burst out from the living room, his socks slipping across the hardwood floor as his face flashed with alarm. He hurried over to me. "Mom, are you okay? Did you hurt yourself? Should I call an ambulance?" I shook my head, wincing from the pain in my arm, and tried to smile for his sake. "I'm fine. I just scraped my hand, that's all. It's early in the morning. Let's try not to wake up the whole neighborhood." He gently helped me up and eased me down onto the wooden chair in the hallway, his hand supporting my trembling back. His worry was plain in his face. In those wide eyes, so much like when he was little and sick, burying his head in my lap, crying with fever. I could still see my boy. "But then," a cold voice called down from upstairs. It drifted as easily through the air as someone chatting about the weather light. Detached and almost bored. "Try to be more careful next time, all right? Nobody has time to drop everything for you." It was Jessica. No hurried footsteps coming down, no door swinging open, not even a glance of concern. Nothing from her was directed my way, not a single flicker of worry or care. There I sat, clutching my aching arm, legs folded under me, just listening as her words floated down like stale air. Michael said nothing. I looked into his face, hoping, just hoping he'd speak out. Maybe say a word on my behalf or comfort me, even just a little. But he turned away, eyes fixed on the floor, lips pressed tight. I stood and forced a slightly shaky voice. "I'll be all right. I think I just need to lie down for a bit." "Don't worry about me, okay?" he answered quietly, almost under his breath. "Okay, just be careful." And then he turned away, as if what just happened had been the smallest accident, nothing more than a clumsy stumble. I made my way back up to the attic room, peeling off my coat with one achy hand, and looked down at my swollen, bruised arm. No blood, but it was puffed and blue from the blow, a deep, throbbing ache pulsing through the bone. My hands trembled as I reached for the cold pack in the mini fridge. I told myself it was just the cold, but deep down I knew it was something else. That's the moment when it struck me, as clear and sharp as ice. I was no longer someone that anybody worried about. I sat on my little bed, gazing out the attic window at the backyard garden where I'd just fallen. The wind still blew thin across the grass, and I watched the sparrows darting over the roof, but something inside me right in that instant cracked. There'd been little fractures growing for so long, but now the sound split through. A silence sharp enough to pierce the heart. That night, sleep refused to come. I got up, wrapped my shawl over my shoulders, and sat at my old writing desk pressed against the window. There, inside the top drawer, tucked underneath some bills and spare buttons, was the notebook I'd started weeks ago. A diary, nothing fancy, just a place for my real feelings. On a clean page I wrote, "November, I slipped in the garden this morning." Michael rushed out, helped me up. But Jessica's voice floated down from upstairs. "Try to be more careful next time. Nobody has time to drop everything for you." What hurt me was not my hand, but my heart. My hand trembled when I set the pen down, a tiny tremor running through my fingers. I asked myself, when did indifference become normal? At what point did all those nights I stayed up nursing my son, the sleepless worry of a mother, become something burdensome, something unwelcome? The next morning, I rose before dawn as usual, cooked breakfast, and scrubbed the stairs. But from then on, I began to count. I kept tally of the times Jessica addressed me without emotion, a voice as flat as yesterday's coffee. I paid attention to every time the laughter from Michael and Jessica in the living room stopped cold as soon as I walked in. I quietly marked the instances I forced myself to smile, even though I felt nothing at all. Why do I do this? Even I can't say for sure. But I think, deep down, I didn't want to forget. Someday, I might doubt myself, wonder if I'd imagined it, if I'd just been too sensitive. I feared that most of all. Because forgetting, that's how older people become invisible, how their pain is erased. If I ever forgot how much these moments hurt, I'd lose the power to speak up, to have any voice left. So, I kept writing. Words, glances, every small gesture that, in its casual ease, still held a sting of rejection or dismissal. A few pages later, I wrote, November. Jessica asked, "Why don't you ever eat with us, Mom?" But the day before, she'd said, "You should just eat alone upstairs. It's easier for everyone that way. It feels like I don't have a place here anymore." Another day, November. I overheard Jessica on the phone. Living with old people is exhausting. They want to butt in on everything. I don't know who she was talking to, but I knew, without question, she meant me. Since then, I started moving around the house more carefully. I made sure to minimize every sound. The closing of a door, the step on the stairs, telling myself, don't be a bother. Don't get in the way. I still did chores as always, dusting, folding laundry, keeping the kitchen counter shining. But inside, I'd begun to think, no one even sees this. No one's watching at all. One evening, I overheard Jessica speaking to Michael. Her voice slipped through the crack in my attic door. "Your mother does all this because she wants you to notice her, to like her. She pretends it's kindness, but it's all for show." I sat quietly in my room. What hurt was not hearing those words. What truly hurt was Michael's silence. He said nothing. I knew in my bones, if even one person stood by me, I could have withstood anything. But when silence itself turns away, even someone who's been strong all her life is left feeling utterly alone. The day I fell in the garden, I realized my body just wasn't what it used to be. But the ache inside my heart that stayed, as vivid as ever. I told no one. I simply kept writing. Because if I didn't protect my memories, no one else would. Someday, maybe, only these quiet words would remain. The last witnesses to a truth everyone else preferred to ignore. On my 76th birthday, thick, gray clouds hung over the suburban New York sky. Cold wind wrapped the whole block like a heavy, silent sheet. I expected nothing. Truly, after years of quiet frost and wordless evenings, I'd taught myself not to hope for parties or kind words. But that morning, Michael spoke up from the living room, his voice simple, matter-of-fact. "Mom, I'll be home tonight. Jessica and I want to cook a little and celebrate your birthday. Just us, nothing fancy." His tone didn't change, but I gave him a small smile. Not because I expected anything grand, just to tell myself, even the smallest kindness I would try to accept. So that day, I swept my little attic from top to bottom, brushed out my hair, and, for the first time in years, slipped into my old best dress. It meant nothing special, only that I wanted to hold on to some last scrap of pride. I took a deep breath, looked in the mirror, and told myself, tonight is just another night. But you, Evelyn, you're still here. You matter, whether they see it or not. And with that, I stepped back into a world that had grown colder. But where? Just maybe, my own quiet dignity could still carry me through. That night, dinner was set out in the living room, just like always. 3 places at a plain, square wooden table. No flowers, no cake, no candles, no frills. Just bowls of chicken noodle soup, perfectly grilled trout, creamed spinach over soft tofu, and a plate of warm, steamed vegetables. Food that filled the stomach, not the heart. But I smiled anyway. Told myself again, it's enough that they've remembered at all. Over and over I said it, like a prayer only meant for myself. We all sat down to eat. Michael took his usual seat at the head of the table. Across from me, Jessica, my daughter-in-law, kept her gaze fixed on her plate, not once meeting my eyes. The silence, so thick, pressed across my shoulders like a heavy wool blanket. Michael poured a splash of white wine into 3 tiny glasses, his voice breaking that hush. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said quietly. My reply came out just above a whisper. "Thank you. Thank you for remembering the day." That was the whole exchange. Nothing fancy, nothing big. But even that, those 6 words, seemed to turn something inside Jessica. Some line must have been crossed, some trigger pulled that I never saw coming. Jessica didn't hesitate. She set her chopsticks down on the table. Her movement sharp, direct, and final. As if closing a door without looking back. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You know," she began, her voice cool and even. "I haven't liked you since the day we first met." The words dropped into the room like a stone into water, stopping everything. Outside, I could hear the winter wind whistling around the corners of the house, seeping in through the window frames. That same coldness crawled up inside me, spreading to the deepest parts of my chest. Slow and steady. Jessica wasn't finished. She kept going, her expression unchanged, her words as steady as if she'd rehearsed them. "You always stick your nose into everything, acting like the understanding mother, always ready to jump in and help. It might look considerate, but honestly, it's only ever felt intrusive. You're always out of step, talking about things nobody asked, always taking on this role of the self-sacrificing mom. It's exhausting." Michael said nothing. He just stared at his glass, eyes down, silent, as if all of this was happening in a room far away. He didn't move. He didn't even look at me. I just nodded, picked up a neat square of tofu, and brought it to my mouth. Slow and careful. Pretending, just for a second, that nothing at all had happened. But inside, something crumbled, cracks starting where I'd never noticed them before. Those words, those things Jessica said, they weren't just invented tonight. She'd been carrying them, waiting for the right time. She chose my birthday. I glanced at Michael, hoping he'd lift his head, defend me, say something soft to break the tension. But he didn't. He stayed silent. In that quiet, I felt the weight of everything I'd given, years, decades, pressing invisible on my skin. Dinner went on. The only sound was the clink of utensils against ceramic plates, and the rustle of napkins. No one smiled, no one laughed, nobody even tried to make this evening warm. My eyes drifted across the table, at the bowls and dishes I'd made, at the places set for three. Once upon a time, our family table was something to be proud of. Each dish used to carry memories, a history only we shared. But now? It was just food, lined up on the table, filling a gap, keeping us occupied as we all moved further away from each other. Each bite I took drove home a truth. I don't belong here anymore. But I wouldn't let myself cry. I refused my own tears. The one thing you cannot allow, when your children or their spouses say you are unwanted, is to break in front of them. Lifting another bite of tofu, I asked myself, what is left for a mother who has become unwelcome? My answer, in the end, was silence. Because no matter how carefully you speak, no matter what words you choose, you're always accused of misunderstanding, of being dramatic, of living purely by your feelings. Too old to change, too out of touch. If you show anger, they call you difficult, a troublemaker. If you start to cry, they say you're trying to manipulate everyone else. So, I stayed still and smiled, a little brittle smile that I wasn't sure even reached my own heart. I ate everything on my plate, neat and deliberate, not leaving a crumb behind. I wanted to leave no trace of anger, no sign I was hurt. I wanted this night to be just a night, nothing more. When we finished eating, I stood up quietly and bowed my head. Thank you for supper. I think I'll head on up to bed now. No one called after me. No one asked me to stay. No one said happy birthday a second time. No one said, aren't you lonely? I made my way back to my attic room, the small space I'd moved into so Jessica and Michael could have the downstairs, the best part of the house. I slipped out of my dress, folded it carefully, and hung it on the old wooden hanger. Then I sat cross-legged on my cot and drew out my worn diary, the pages frayed, corners worn soft as cloth. There in the lamplight I wrote, 76th birthday. 3 at the table. One of them told me, she never liked me, not from the start. One said nothing, just stayed silent the whole night. One me ate tofu and smiled. Tonight, I understood quietly, I don't belong in this house anymore. The dark ink spread into the paper's weave, pooling in the little cracks. No one can see a hurt like this, not even your own children. That's why I write everything down. To bear witness, if only for myself. So I won't forget, so I can remember, as long as I live. I looked out the attic window over the backyard. The moon had climbed high, pouring its gentlest light on the rows of tomato vines and wildflowers I'd tended every day. Even so, even surrounded by the soft beauty outside, I could not feel grateful. I could only remember old birthdays. At 60, Michael was still single, lighting a tiny birthday cake with a single crooked candle. "Make a wish, Mom," he insisted. And I wished. May you meet a gentle, loving woman who takes care of this family. At 65, not long after their wedding, Jessica had still been polite. She told me my homemade soup was delicious, that she was happy to live in my home. Back then, I'd really believed we'd end up as family, dozens of memories, half sketched in my mind. But now, at 76, I'd finally received a present, the words from Jessica. "I never liked you," tied up with Michael's silence, like a ribbon on a box. I wouldn't let myself cry, but that night, sleep never came. I sat by the attic window under the weak glow of my stand lamp, the old diary open on my lap. The wind brushed gently at the glass, a soft tapping, almost like someone knocking. "Are you all right?" it seemed to ask. But I didn't know how to answer. The house, in that moment, was quieter than it had ever been. No television sounds from downstairs, no thump of Michael in the hallway, no bright laughter from Jessica drifting up through the vents. Nothing at all. The building itself seemed to want to let me slip gently, naturally, and completely away. I took my dress down, carefully smoothing the sleeves and collar. The fabric held the faintest hint of cedar, clinging to an old scent I hadn't noticed in years. This was Walter's last gift before he died. "Wear this on a special day," he'd said. "The happiest day, just for you." This wasn't happiness, not even close. But I'd worn the dress anyway, reaching for a sense of belonging. I just wanted to believe, if only for a moment, I am still allowed to be here. I stroked the seams, the tiny, perfect stitches holding everything together. All those years, I believed my own strength would last. But in that attic, with the house so silent, I felt the ground shifting beneath me. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Standing, I opened the old wooden chest in the corner and pulled out a small tin box. And with that, the story continues, as silence settles in. And I do everything possible not to forget what belonged to me, what I lost, and what parts of me still remain. Inside the old cedar chest tucked against the far wall of the attic, I kept the things I called my own. Not many, but each precious. There were a handful of letters from Walter, my late husband, tied together with blue ribbon. There were photographs of Michael as a child, his gap-toothed grin, the star-shaped band-aid on his knee, the way he once clung to my skirt when strangers visited, and then, hidden further back, my bank book kept secret, carefully stashed at the bottom. That account wasn't meant for retirement or emergencies. The balance inside those pages? Never much, never more than about maybe $3,000, saved over a lifetime, stood only as proof that some tiny piece of my life, my circumstances, was still under my own control. It didn't matter how small the amount. What I clung to was the idea. There's still something in my life that belongs to me. That answers only to me. Each deposit marked a private, hard-won victory. I counted every penny at the supermarket, wrote down prices in a notebook, made my own haircuts standing at the tiny attic mirror, sewed old dresses into new shapes, mended what I could, ran the thermostat low. And when I caught a cold, brewed up old home remedies, ginger tea or just a bowl of hot water, letting it steam chase the ache away. We weren't poor. Not truly, not the way some families have to go without. But still, I watched every nickel, trimmed every corner. I suppose, if you asked why, the answer is simple. I wanted every small comfort, every little extra luxury, to go to Michael first. I gave without hesitation. Every day I told myself, this is the joy of motherhood. If my son was happy, I would be content. But the truth, so sharp, so sudden, came to me late and all at once. Those comforts, those sacrifices, were never recognized as such. No one said, "Thank you." It was all just a mother's duty, expected, unseen, always consumed without a second thought. If your usefulness ended, so did their notice. You stopped existing in any meaningful sense, and the work of dozens of years disappeared as if it had never been. With a trembling hand, I closed the bankbook and replaced every treasure. The letters, the photographs, the soft old bankbook itself. I set them back in the tin box. Then I returned the box to its place in the cedar chest, and stood quietly at my attic desk in the half-light of night, unsure what would come next. In my diary that night, I wrote only one clear line. If sacrifice is the last thing left to me, then from today, I'll keep it as my treasure. No one else will dare touch it without my say. The moon outside my attic window shone round and bright, a perfect circle, not high above the frozen shingles. Its light slanted across the backyard, trailing over puddles left by evening rain, touching each stepping stone with the faint cold glow of silver. I watched that stretch of quiet yard for a long while. That was where I'd fallen just weeks before, a small patch of dirt marked by my clumsiness. But now, gazing down, I felt no pain at all. Instead, an odd comfort gathered, a quietness that seemed to give shape to something I'd never known before. I sat up the night through, listening to the whispers of wind and the lonely pulse of my own heart. What kept me awake wasn't Jessica's cruel words at dinner, nor the familiar ache of being unneeded in my own home. No, what kept me from rest was the sheer vastness of quiet within me, a gentle, level calm. My spirit felt like a lake without ripples, not struggling for sense or direction, just being. I had nothing left to resist, no protest, only stillness. Toward dawn, I sat at my little desk again, reached for the last sheet of my ivory-colored stationery. This was the good stuff. I'd used it only for Walter, only for birthdays, or when writing gratitude to old friends who had long since faded from my life. It somehow felt wrong, using it for a family still living beneath my roof. But that's what I did. I addressed this letter not to the world outside, but to those who shared my home, those who still called me family, though the meaning of that word had changed so much for me. I uncapped my pen and wrote, each letter slow and deliberate, impressed as if on my own heart. My name is Evelyn Fisher. Today, I turn 76. Thank you for preparing the dinner tonight. It wasn't the warm gathering I once hoped for, but still, just being given a seat at the table was enough for me to understand where I now stand. This letter is my notice. I am no longer the owner of this house. A month ago, I signed over the deed and completed the sale. By the end of this month, the new owners will come to handle the last of the paperwork with their attorney. What you do with the house after that is up to you. I do not blame any of you. I am not angry. I am simply following the path you've set before me. After tonight, I will no longer count myself a part of this home or this family. With calm hands, I folded the letter and slicked it into an unmarked envelope. I left it on the kitchen table, the same spot where Jessica's words had landed. Hard the night before. This time, I signed with my own silence. An ending, deliberate and dignified. Then, moving quietly, I began to pack. There was almost nothing to take, just a small suitcase with 3 changes of clothes, a cloth pouch for old photos, my diary, and a faded dress, the one I wore for my wedding day so many years ago. The furniture, the kitchen goods, the little comforts accumulated across decades, I left them all behind. They had stopped belonging to me long, long before. Before departing, I turned once, last, to survey the attic space. It was cramped, the ceiling sloped, draft seeping under the eaves. But I had believed, foolishly or not, that this would be my resting place, the final home of my old age. I stared at the narrow window, the one that looked out on bare shingles. I remembered watering the violets every morning, listening to the soft sound of rain at night, watching as each day slipped away quietly in a corner that shrank small as I grew old. I crept down the steps, quiet as turning the page of a book you don't want to end. The house was hushed and cold, No light from the bedrooms, not a sound from below. Surely Jessica must have fallen asleep on her laptop, scraps of work still open on the screen. Michael, perhaps, dozing on his side, hand resting on his brow, echo of a child's gesture that once called for my comfort. I passed through the living room, a place where I'd played with my grandson just a handful of times until Jessica had told me not to interrupt their afternoon routine. I'd never been asked back. I stepped by the kitchen, where Jessica had shut the door with those same words. Too small for two, it's better if you stay out. I had accepted everything, every line, every boundary drawn around me. I did not open a single door. I left no last words. I wanted no more farewells. At the entrance, I slipped my shoes on, feeling the familiar curve of the soles. One of the few small things that had ever truly fit. Then, softly, I closed the door behind me. The tiny click, barely more than the tap of a teacup, sounded final. It was punctuation, the full stop at the end of the only chapter I'd ever really written for myself. I caught the first train out, before sunrise. The city was a dark watercolor, blurred with dawn's faintest blue. Even the streets had not yet woken up. In the train's window, I glimpsed myself, an old woman now. Thin, gray, holding a faded cloth bag, eyes ringed with weariness, mouth pressed tight. But the mouth held no sadness, only quiet determination. By the time the train reached White Plains just north of the city, the sun was lifting. The air felt fresher, time moving slower, space opening up all around. Hardly anyone on the sidewalks, no crush of rush hour, only the gentle emptiness of a suburban morning. That emptiness, I found, was not so lonely after all. I breathed deep, cold air filling my chest like another first chance. For the first time in years, it was just breath. No one to care for but myself. I had bought a small apartment, third floor, no elevator, in a shabby old co-op built decades ago. 450 square feet, a single bedroom, tiny kitchen, a window overlooking a patch of shared grass out back. Why this place? It faced east, welcoming the morning sun, and the post office sat right around the corner. Even now, I preferred proper letters to phone calls. Words, written slow and careful, felt truer than anything said in haste. I flicked on the light, set my battered suitcase down, and sat directly on the bare hardwood floor. No couch, no kitchen table, no voices, just me, and at last the blessed hush I'd spent so long searching for. I poured myself a glass of cool water, cradled it in both hands, and gazed out at the dawn. Pale gold spilled across the windowsill, touching the one empty bookcase, the thin, unfamiliar paint on the walls. I smiled, small and real, and began to imagine lining the window's ledge with pots, succulents, maybe chrysanthemums if I could find a nursery nearby. From the folds of my cloth bag, I drew out the picture of Walter, pressed gently to my lips, whispering, "I'm home." Inside me now was not anger, not resentment, only one clear thing, a kind of wholehearted acceptance. My family no longer needed me. No one did. I opened my diary and wrote beneath the new date, "Today I left the house I once thought I'd live in till I died." No one saw me off. No one witnessed me go. I left only a letter, not to scold but to bear witness. To say, I was here, I lived, I have lived, I have left. And I did so, quietly, on my own terms. And now, in that clean, silent emptiness, I found peace not in being needed, or thanked, or remembered, but in simply being. And perhaps, at last, in learning that the space I left behind, my absence, not my presence, would say more than I ever could have spoken in a lifetime of words. To disappear. That, I've come to believe, is the gentlest way a person can say goodbye when they are no longer needed. I closed my diary and slipped it deep inside the old wooden drawer of my new apartment. Through the barely opened window, faint laughter bubbled up from the playground across the street, a group of children at play. For a moment, the sound brought a fleeting image of my grandson's face to mind. Grandma? That word? Whenever he'd called me by it, it was only ever prompted by his mother. It was nothing more or less than that. I have never once blamed my grandson. A child, after all, shoulders no guilt in this. Still, a single question sometimes drifted up from somewhere quiet inside me. If, someday, he were to ask, "Grandma, where did you go?" who would know how to answer? Honestly and kindly? I let myself relax, lying back on the floor in the delicate hush of my new place. My heartbeat pulsed in my chest, steady and soft, its rhythm grounding but solitary. No more tiptoeing through my own home, no more holding my tongue, or waiting for someone to remember to say my name. No more forced, careful smiles just to keep the peace. Now, at last, there is real quiet, a deeper stillness. Freedom, in its purest, loneliest form. And so I set out, alone, on a journey that was mine to choose. But it was only later, long after those first days passed in voiceless calm, that I began to recognize what I'd never anticipated. That such silence, heavy and undisturbed, could leave behind the loudest echo of all. That afternoon, I made a trip up the block to the small general store near my building and bought myself a brand new electric kettle. The lady behind the counter looked to be about my age. Kind, sturdy, the sort you can picture, chatting with her neighbors over the garden fence. "Are you new to the community?" she asked, glancing at the reusable bag on my arm. I smiled and gave her a little nod of affirmation. Her eyes brightened. "Well, if you ever have some free time, you should come join us moms at the health club in the park down the road. Every morning around 10, a handful of us gather, just to share stories, maybe walk a few laps together. It's a wonderful little routine." I offered a polite smile, as one does, though in truth her invitation caught me quite off guard. It had been a long time, so long that I could barely recall the last since someone had asked me to join them, without any reason, no obligation. Just the simple hope of company. Back at my apartment, I filled the new kettle, set it to boil, and unpacked a small package of vanilla-flavored tea biscuits on my wooden table. In the pale afternoon sunlight, something about the ordinariness, the simplicity of the moment, eased something inside me I hadn't realized was still so tight. Not a soul called my name. No one asked about dinner, or chores, or if I could please just do one more thing. No one demanded I yield my space or swallow my words. For once, in giving nothing, I also became a burden to no one. How peaceful, how soothing that quiet really was. Only then did I begin to understand. I pulled out a crisp postcard and wrote just a few lines, the words flowing naturally for the first time in years. The recipient, my only enduring friend, Linda Barnes. A name that still brought a smile every time I wrote it. Linda, I finally made it out. And I'm fine. No one needs to ask, and there's nothing I owe by way of explanation. With a sun-warmed corner, a tiny room, and a desk to write the thoughts I never could say out loud. That's enough for me now. Carefully, I pressed a stamp in the corner, setting the card by the front door to mail in the morning. I settled back at my desk, watching the late sun pouring through the western window, the day's last golden light slicing slowly across the wall. Its glow was lovely, lingering but fading. An image of endings arriving kindly, without harshness. A thought, gentle but persistent, hovered at the back of my mind. In that old house of mine, would anyone pause long enough to realize what, not just who, had been lost? Not the presence of a quiet old woman, but the solitary witness me who'd endured, loved, and given everything, always unnoticed, through decades of patience and care. I don't know if they ever will, yet someday, I think it's inevitable. The truth that someone was here, and that the emptiness left in that someone's place could never quite be patched over by a belated apology, by any hurried explanation. A week slipped by, quiet but gentle, since moving into my little apartment just north of the city. It was around then that I felt the first stirrings of something I had long expected, quietly winding its way toward me. That morning, I'd just started the kettle for tea when my phone buzzed loudly. On the table, a number I didn't recognize lighting up the screen. I let it ring. A few minutes later, another number. Then another. And finally, a message appeared. "Mom, where are you? Please, I'm sorry. This is all my fault. Can you just answer, please? My phone sat, silent now, on the table. The screen flashed on and off, vibrating in small, strict pulses, a sound that reminded me of a prayer spoken too late. Still, I did not pick it up. It's not that I am cold or heartless, but the crack inside me had grown too deep, the sorrow too old. A handful of hasty words, a desperate phone call, none of it could mend the quiet damage dealt over so many years. And I understood the truth all too well. Those calls were not about missing me. Not in the way that matters. That afternoon, an express envelope arrived, legal documents sent via overnight courier. The sender, the law office who'd handled the house sale. Inside, a duplicate of the transfer of possession notice, formal and impersonal, sent both to the new owners and to me. The language was brief but merciless. Within 30 days of receipt of this letter, all current occupants must vacate the premises to allow for legal change of ownership. Please note, Ms. Evelyn Fisher has granted no legal occupancy or property rights to any individual at that address. I folded the letter quietly, slipping it away in my desk. I did not feel joy, sorrow, or anger. Only the stillness of marking off the last item on a long and weary list. I could all too easily picture their reactions. Michael, my son, would be stunned. After all these years, he'd never known me to make a decision without long talks and consensus. Jessica, perhaps anger, perhaps indignation, maybe a sense of betrayal. But this was no betrayal. After such long, quiet years of pain, it was simply the legal end to a connection that had already unraveled. I combed through the new messages that arrived, hoping, perhaps, for some glimmer of true concern, but they all read the same. Mom, you sold the house? Why didn't you tell us? Where are you? Why keep this a secret? If this place is gone, what will happen for the grandkids? And from Jessica, colder still, are you trying to leave us homeless? Are you out to ruin our reputation? Page after page, I read each message and closed my phone again. Not a single one asked, "Are you okay, Mom? Are you warm enough? Have you been eating? Are you lonely?" Each word was only about themselves, their anger, their worry, their upset. What never crossed their mind was the heart of a mother who left in the cold of a winter night, her only luggage a single suitcase. And so I made no reply. Instead, that evening, I opened my diary and wrote, March, 83 missed calls. I didn't answer. It's not because I'm cold. It's because, when I needed a hug most, all I got in return was a closed door. I am only guarding what dignity I have left. That's all. Even as the day faded and the world outside my window slipped into another quiet blue night inside, in the smallest, surest corner of my being, I felt almost at peace. This too, the silence I now kept had become my gentlest voice, my last, honest farewell. And perhaps, though it will never be said out loud, my absence was the only way they'd ever understand what my presence used to mean. The echo that remains is louder, far, than any memory of my voice. That is what I leave behind. The blank space, the silence, where a mother's love once lived, waiting to be noticed before it was gone. One quiet afternoon, I decided to walk over to the post office in my new town, just outside of White Plains. The air was brisk for spring, carrying the faint, sweet scent of blooming lilacs from someone's yard as I strolled down the sidewalk. Inside the tidy little brick building, I bought a cheerful postcard and wrote a brief note to Linda Barnes, my oldest and truest friend of the past 60 years. I thanked her simply and sincerely for her constant kindness, for never wavering, never forgetting me, even after the move. When I dropped the postcard into the blue mailbox out front, I felt a small but unmistakable sense of closure. There was no longer any need to justify who I was or why I had left to anyone. I had chosen a life that finally belonged to me. When I came home, I noticed a blinking red light on my old cell phone. Missed calls. 7, just today alone. I turned the phone off. The cold, mechanical ring had, for years now, made my stomach twist. That sound tugged me right back into the anxious past, into all the voices that hadn't truly wanted to know me, but had only reached out of fear of loss, out of some sense of obligation, or the vague worry that something precious might be slipping from their grasp. I no longer wished for them to seek me in fear, or to call me because they thought they'd lost a possession rather than a person. If love had truly filled their hearts, neither Michael nor Jessica would have left me to eat in that cramped attic, nor turned their backs so easily the night Jessica bared her real feelings at dinner. I remembered once overhearing a neighbor talking in the hall, telling the landlord, "I've seen a young man wandering around looking for an older lady, white hair, thin, with high cheekbones, slow on her feet." I could only imagine it was Michael, retracing his steps through my old neighborhood. But always, I remained cautious. I didn't leave my apartment during the hours I once used to shop, and I even altered my daily route from the store back home. My new habits arose not from any fear of confrontation, but from a deeper, clearer understanding. At this fragile point, neither Michael nor Jessica and I could hope to have a true conversation, nothing that would heal us, nothing that would rise above old wounds and cross old divides. Instead, I wanted them to taste what silence means, not as punishment, but as a gift, a necessary interlude, a blank space to sit inside the pain of losing the one whose steady care they'd taken for granted all those years. Sometimes, a mother's silence becomes a child's last, lingering lesson. 10 days after I first ignored their calls, a package arrived by mail. Inside, carefully folded, was a handkerchief? A faded square patterned with blue and white checks. I recognized it immediately. The cloth I used to keep tucked at my waist while I cooked for Michael as a child, the one I'd tended every Thanksgiving and Christmas, dabbing up spills or patting flour from Michael's chin. Tucked beneath the cloth was a little slip of notepaper. I opened it. The handwriting trembled, but was unmistakably Michael's. "Mom, I'm sorry." And then, below that, just one broken, vulnerable line, almost a child's voice. "If you're reading this, I want you to know that, inside, I'm still the same son whose hand you held on rainy days, all those years ago." I set the paper aside, folding it back into its envelope, and placed it into a drawer in my writing desk. I did not write back. Because "I'm sorry," spoken only after something is lost forever, is not the apology a mother's heart yearns for. Regret voiced in the echo of emptiness is very different from one given in time to heal, a wound that burrows deep in the heart, a pain rooted over years and watered by countless small slights does not vanish on the back of a few tears, or even an honest plea for forgiveness. Sometimes, all you can do is accept the scar and move forward, step by step, into your own quiet peace. In these days, I keep my routine simple, gentle. I water the faded spider plants in their clay pots by my sun-splashed window. I read battered library novels borrowed from the branch nearby, drop them off in the after-hours slot each week, always finding a new one tucked inside the bin just for me, labeled Ms. Fisher. I listen to the morning news on the local NPR station while I warm day-old bread in the toaster. In the park just around the corner, there's a small gathering of women my age who meet for coffee at 10 on weekdays. Sometimes, I join them for a few minutes, listening as they reminisce about ration lines during the war, summer picnics with their children, the painful beauty of living through both lean and abundant years. Not long ago, one woman, Martha, turned to me and asked, "Evelyn, what's your secret? How do you remain so calm living all on your own?" I just smiled and left the question hanging. Because, in truth, what I want isn't happiness. Not exactly. Not the bustling, noisy joy of television ads and crowded holidays. I wanted only quiet, a kind of gentle stillness, peace in its simplest, most unadorned form. I searched my whole life for it. And only after letting go, after loosening my grip on being anyone's mom, anyone's wife, did I discover its taste. True quiet isn't found in a crowded house, or even in the cheerful chaos of a family dinner. It blooms in a place where expectations press in no longer, where no one fingers the old wounds or rehearses old arguments. In that absence, I've learned to just breathe. to know the world, and myself, outside the old bonds of duty. It's been over a month since I left that house. The space? The home I once believed would witness my dying days, cradle my last breaths, has been empty of my laughter, my footsteps, the scent of my cinnamon bread baking on Sunday mornings. There's been no three-person dinners around the battered old oak table. No footsteps shuffling up and down those familiar stairs. No one has left a casserole on my doorstep, or called to tease me about my birthday, or even asked, "Mom, need anything at the store?" That silence is not emptiness. It's what remains when there is nothing left to explain, nothing left wanting. That is what quiet means to me. Not loneliness, not hollowness, but a gentle stillness that lets what's truly important bubble up. A silence you listen to as you would the whisper of God at the edge of your dreams. Each morning, I brew myself a small pot of tea and set my cup on the windowsill. Light spills across the rim, warming my wrinkled knuckles as I pause to watch it move through the leaves of my potted spider plant. No one looks at me as if I'm in the way. No one believes I linger like an out-of-place trinket buried on a crowded shelf. Here, finally, I can breathe in time with my own body, move by my own rhythm. I've learned to live slowly, not just because I'm old, but because I no longer want to rush by the world's finer details. The single daffodil blooming by the bus stop, the laughter of little children as they race behind a dog in the courtyard, the sound of wind flickering through the maples by my building's front door. Silence, in the end, is not meaningless. Like the pages of my diary, even its blankness says, "You mattered. Your love mattered." I've also come to accept the knowledge for the first time in my life, without shame or pain, that it's okay to be disliked. Not because I was wrong, but simply because, for some, kindness and devotion become a burden if they are always assumed, forever unacknowledged. That, I've learned, is just the way of things. But with that newfound acceptance, I learned another small, bright truth. Worth does not come from what others see, or what praise they give, or how much they reciprocate your sacrifices. I have value because I am, in myself, enough. Whether anyone else ever says so or not. All these years, I tried to live for others, to melt myself into their needs. From now on, I intend to live for me. One afternoon, as I leaned over the metal banister to water my window boxes, a small girl looked up from the parking lot below. She beamed, her round face glowing with curiosity. "Ma'am, your flowers are beautiful," she called up to me, her voice so bright it cut through even the dull roar of passing cars. I smiled, and though my voice caught, I nodded. Inside, a small seed of light pushed through the shadows. That girl, she was no kin to me. No granddaughter, no long-lost niece, but she saw me. Not as a burden, not as just an old lady, but as a person, simple and whole. I plucked a single daisy and walked down the stairs, offering it to her with a quiet, "Here, for you. I hope it brightens your day." She clutched the flower, eyes sparkling. "Thank you, ma'am." She ran back to her mother, waving the bloom like a small flag. I realized, as I climbed the stairs back up, that it had been years since I truly felt I could give something, however small, to another person, and be seen for it. I am not angry with Michael. I no longer feel bitterness towards Jessica. I have no wish for them to hunt me down, or to stand in my doorway wringing their hands, apologies tumbling too late. I don't want reparations or confessions. All I want now, and here on out, is understanding. Not regret, not sadness, but the simple awareness, the one who stood by you all those years, in sickness or in health, in silence and longing, did so not for want of recognition, not for lack of something else to do. She did it out of a love that is bigger, deeper, and more patient than you could imagine. But love cannot stand forever on the edge of being ignored. If it is taken always as the background consumed, expected, left to linger in the corners, one day, when you finally turn to reach for it, it will be gone. I pull out my diary, worn at the edges from a year's worth of stories scribbled in the light of lonely nights, and open to the last page. This is my story. When someone wonders, why did she keep quiet all those years? What did mom want? I hope these words will answer. My silence was not cowardice. I did not stay quiet out of weakness. I simply would not turn love, my deepest feeling, into a bargaining chip or an instrument of guilt. And if, in the end, the only way I could hold on to my dignity was to vanish quietly, to let go rather than twist myself to be loved, then let it be so. That is the end I chose, and I chose it knowingly. I lay my pen down. The final period comes gently. As softly as the night I closed the door, left the old house behind. No angry words, no defense, no demand for explanation, no backward glance. Now, I am simply Evelyn Fisher, 76, living quietly in a small apartment with my plants and my books. I am no longer mom, wife, or grandma, a bundle of roles to satisfy someone else's need. Just Evelyn, and that, at long last, is more than enough. Tell me, what about you? Have you ever watched a mother, wounded by life, sit alone at the table, pressed silent while the world whirls and blames her for being too invisible? Have you ever wondered what she's held inside? All that she's swallowed? All the words she could never say? Perhaps the person who raised you, the one you think will always wait, always forgive, always love, has just, one day, grown quiet and slipped away. Pick up the phone. Write a note. Not to beg forgiveness, but for one simple phrase. Mom, are you doing all right? And when the time comes, when silence is all that answers, remember that is a story too. I would love to hear yours. Somewhere, in the corner of this very comment thread, there may be, right at this moment, someone's mother waiting for words that will truly reach her. She may be hoping with all her heart that someone will finally listen and mean it. Allow me to introduce myself again. My name is Evelyn Fisher. I am a mother who, on her 76th birthday, learned what it means to be rejected by her own family. I took every shred of love I had left, wrapped it carefully, and then quietly stepped out of that house. Not a trace left behind. Nothing at all. I left them only one thing, the empty space no one could ever fill. I did not take anger with me, nor bitterness, nor even a desire for explanation. That silence, the hush after goodbye, is all I have offered in return for the decades I gave them, day after patient day. In old age, I realized the truth. Sometimes love, given freely for so long, simply becomes invisible. It is assumed, taken for granted, expected as surely as the sunrise. But when that love is gone, when, one day, the chair sits empty at dinner, and the washing machine spins with no one to fold the clothes, what remains is not merely absence. There is a chasm, an unbridgeable gap that aches deep in the walls of the house, flash epics, echoing in every room. I have come to believe that is all a mother can truly leave behind. Not things, not explanations, but silence. A silence that will remind them, maybe someday, that she was here, that she loved, that she mattered. And so, if you find yourself reading these words, hear this much, somewhere. A mother is waiting for honesty, a voice that sees her, thanks her, cares to understand what is left when love is overlooked one time, too many. All that is left is the blank space, a loss impossible to mend. Please, do not let the first time you notice it be when it is already too late.